My little sister, who is 3 years younger than I am, finds herself on the brink of a transformative journey: motherhood. She is 16 years old, just a few important years younger than me, and expecting her first child. The baby shower is looming on the horizon, scheduled for this Thursday, and instead of being filled with excitement or joy at the prospect of celebrating, I am plagued by indecision. I am unsure if I want to go. A crucial part of this hesitation stems from the relationship dynamics I have shared with my sister over the years. Growing up, we did not always see eye to eye. This wasn't a typical sibling rivalry where silly arguments over toys took place. No, our discord was rooted deeply in the sense of favoritism that shadowed our family environment for as long as I can remember. My sister was the baby my mom seemed ready and excited for, her eagerly anticipated child, and I, unfortunately, was not. It felt as if my mother showed blatant preference for my sister, and as time passed, even my sister caught on to this palpable bias. Our household's dynamics further encouraged her behavior. My sister learned very quickly how to manipulate the situation to her advantage. She began to go out of her way to get me into trouble, keen on keeping my mother's favor through any means necessary. As the older sibling, one might expect that I would naturally assume a role of guidance and mentorship. Instead, it felt like I had fallen into a peculiar position where I was perpetually trying to live up to my sister's expectations, rather than her looking up to me. The passage of time and our transition from childhood to adolescence did nothing to mend the growing chasm between us. If anything, adolescence only amplified our discord. When we began to mature, my mother welcomed more children into our family, and with that change came even more responsibility thrust upon my shoulders. While my sister was relishing the quintessential teenage experience, going to dances, making new friends, exploring the vast landscape of young love, I was held back by other roles. I was treated differently, tasked with responsibilities that resembled that of an unpaid babysitter. Household chores, cooking, and cleaning became my domains, those burdening tasks that stole my time and energy. Restricted from enjoying the carefree teenage years myself, my days were filled with errands and duties, making it arduous to form any significant relationships beyond my immediate family. An exception came when I turned 16, and I met a young man, we'll call him Cam. This small beacon of hope and companionship was one of the few things my mother couldn't control about my teenage experience. My mother, however, seemed unamused by Cam. Despite her evident discontent with my choice of a boyfriend, she would freely approve of every unhinged one-night romance or hastily thrown party my sister indulged in. It seemed there was no end to the double standard and the affections heaped upon my sister. Yet, it was during this time, amid the whirlwind of teenage chaos and familial responsibilities, that life handed me an unexpected turn. Some things changed, but others stubbornly stayed the same. One day, 5 months before my birthday, I discovered that I was pregnant. I was in shock, struggling to process a life-altering revelation that felt impossible, having been diagnosed with endometriosis earlier in life. This medical condition made the likelihood of conceiving a child seem so far out of reach that, upon learning of my pregnancy, everything felt surreal. It was like stepping into another realm, one where my hopes fluctuated between hesitant elation and overwhelming fear. What should have been a moment of preparation and growth turned into chaos, marked by relentless stress and strain. I was still living under my mother's roof, caught in a relentless cycle of expectations, duties, and responsibilities. Despite missing appointments like my ultrasound due to my mother's demands, no concessions were made for my new condition, forcing me to soldier on without rest or respite. Life didn't pause for my pregnancy. Instead, it demanded more, eventually becoming an indomitable marathon every day, pushing me to my limits and then some. My existence was marked by exhaustion that overshadowed every beat of my baby's heart that I listened to, every little flutter that would develop into kicks I came to cherish. It was a love forged in strife, defined by absence and longing. Little did I know the trials were setting the stage for heartache yet to come, a brutal hardship that would underscore the fine line between familial obligations and self-preservation where my relationship with my sister was tangled evermore. My mother showed no remorse, no guilt, not a bit of support when I needed it the most. While I lay in a hospital bed, enduring not only the physical pain of loss, but the crushing silence of absent affection from the one person you would hope to rely on, she was preoccupied with picking up my sister from yet another night of chaotic partying. It was an act that firmly cemented my position in the family's hierarchy, reminding me once again of the priorities that seemed to guide her actions. Through the moments of unbearable silence, I found myself surrounded by the comforting presence of my boyfriend, Cam, and his family. They were the only family I felt that I truly had during this catastrophic upheaval. While my biological family carried on as if my miscarriage was merely a footnote in their otherwise routine schedule, Cam's family wrapped me in warmth and understanding. Their kindness and empathy were my lifeline in those solitary hospital hours. Despite the emotional and physical distance laid bare by my experience, I tried to muster the courage to move beyond the pain. I longed to lean into the constructive elements of my life and, for once, be the bigger person, to push ahead and reclaim some semblance of emotional stability. Perhaps, in some naive way, I thought that practicing forgiveness without expectation might salvage some future peace between my sister and me. Yet, even with such thoughts, the weight of unaddressed wounds clung to my spirit like a shadow that refused to leave. My sister, now the expectant mother, was preparing for a new chapter in her life. I genuinely wanted the best for her and her baby. I was determined to approach the situation with grace and maturity, willing to place the past where it belonged, in the past. But this was easier said than done. The bitterness lingered beneath the surface, waiting for the slightest provocation to turn rumination into visible rift. A part of me recognized the need for acceptance and moving forward, but the experiences that made up our shared history were not easy to dismiss. How does one reconcile with feeling forgotten, unvalued, and invisible, particularly by those who should offer unconditional love and support? The road was difficult to navigate, and one that I was forced to tread without much direction. Their lingering indifference felt sharpened by continued favoritism, not through idle observation, but through the continuing communication, or rather lack thereof, that unfolded right before me. I attempted to shoulder this burden, to compartmentalize and survive as best I could, protecting my heart from further estrangement. How could I prepare effectively to witness the joy of new life celebrated in the arms of the sister whose actions threatened to redefine it all in terms of guilt and regret? Consciously telling myself this expressed favoritism was never my wrongdoing turned out to be a lesson I was learning slowly, reluctantly, but surely. Still, addressing these realities and malice straightforwardly seemed an improbable and isolating task. I hoped my mother's neglect had passed along unobserved by prying eyes, yet under the supposed normalization lied its effects on my still tender spirit. The ordeal tested my resolve, but I could not escape the gnawing belief that perhaps, in time, peace and understanding might find their place with light-hearted forgiveness. Yet, my wish remained for both my sister, mom, and me to someday close those festering wounds with grace and maturity, clearing the fog of past grievances. For now, all I could do was try to reconcile my emotions, hoping that I would find a way to acknowledge my grief and extend understanding where it was unlikely to be offered freely. Still, my road to inner acceptance was mine alone to walk, and every restless night and introspective thought was a testament to that struggle. Navigating the aftermath of such a significant loss was a journey that unfolded in solitude. There existed an invisible chasm between me and my mother that seemed insurmountable at times. Her lack of response to my pain reverberated loudly in daily life, as if the echoes of my cries were the only sounds that resonated back to me in a household bustling with its own rhythm. The vision of my mother, absent and indifferent, loomed large in my mind. There was a time when I hoped she might realize the depth of her oversight and come to me with words of reconciliation. Yet, as the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, I slowly began to understand that such a gesture might never come. My mother's world was resiliently and resolutely oriented around my sister, and I had to come to terms with this stark reality. Yet amidst the turmoil, I found islands of solace and support with Cam and his family. Their kindness was unwavering. They offered me not just comfort, but the reassurance that I wasn't alone in my grief, proving that family extends beyond simple blood ties. Their compassion enveloped me like a warm embrace, allowing me space to grieve and, improbably, to hope. I attempted to channel the remaining fragments of my strength into finding a path forward, a way to coexist with the painful memories without being enveloped by them. I longed to break free from the cycle of emotional detention. Every attempt to carve out understanding and space for peace was met with specters of resentment that clung obstinately to the edges of my consciousness. And while moving on seemed an arduous task, I kept the stoic image of moving from surviving to thriving firmly in my mind's eye. Not for my mother's validation, which now felt like a remote fantasy, but for me, a step toward reclaiming my narrative. I envisioned a future unbound by past grievances where both my family and inner peace could coexist. The irony of my sister's pregnancy weighed heavily on my shoulders, sometimes whispering unwelcome questions about the fairness of our respective paths. I wanted to celebrate with her, to smile genuinely at her baby shower without feeling a twang of regret or jealousy. If only life allowed me to fully celebrate new life without reminders of the past appearing unbidden. However, every heartbeat of my unborn child that connected with mine, and the subsequent deep, almost primal sorrow that punctured through my being when their days on this earth were cut short, needed honoring. And yet, there was a fraying thread of hope, suggesting through tentative nudges that introspection might one day lead to the healing I sought. The fragments of courage I managed to cling to along this arduous journey informed me that navigating kindness amidst hurt might build a bridge. one crack at a time, where forgiveness, not exemption from culpability, might grant us all a whispered chance of reconciled affection. Faced with the gulf of misunderstanding, I stood firm, conscious of the need to extend the same empathy that Cam's family had freely provided. I knew this fragile unity was more than worth pursuance, for if we could brave this difficult terrain together, each stride might lead one more step in the direction of emotional closure, dignity, and ultimately, a more profound love than before. Finding my footing within this wild emotional landscape remained a struggle, but the unwavering effort to interlace my pain with compassion was a monumental step toward my ultimate freedom from being seen merely as a casualty of circumstance. But then, amid my attempt at navigating this emotional maze, arose an incident that reopened wounds I had strived so diligently to heal. One day, my sister's soon-to-be mother-in-law and I embarked on a task that seemed benign enough, shopping for supplies for the upcoming baby shower. The errand involved mundane activities like choosing decorations, selecting invitations, and discussing potential themes that were designed to add charm to the event. Yet, beneath the surface of my composed exterior brewed a storm of unresolved conflict. As we drove back from the store, the conversation with my sister's future mother-in-law took an unexpected turn. In the past, I'd tried to steer clear of discussions that held the potential to evoke painful memories. Still, when she casually mentioned the names my sister had chosen for her baby, my heart stopped for a beat. It was an innocuous musing at first. If a girl, the child would be named Scarlet. If a boy, Elijah. The bearings of this revelation were not immediately clear to her, but to me, they held a profound and poignant significance. These were not just any names, these were the names I had lovingly picked out for my own child. Names that I had whispered in silent prayers and carried in my mind like treasures too sacred to be shared with the world. They were remnants of dreams that had been cruelly snatched from me, strands of hope woven intricately into the fabric of my heart. Her statement was filled with casual nonchalance, accompanied by an offhand comment that lodged like a thorn. Why waste an opportunity when someone else can have it? Those words pierced through my fragility, leaving me breathless and grasping for composure. The drive continued, but the conversation on my end faded. I lapsed into silence, swallowed by waves of disbelief and hurt, the car's interior shrinking to the confines of my internal chaos. My mind replayed her words, each syllable echoing with the weight of betrayal and loss. Finally, at my destination, I had no choice but to part ways with her. Kindly, I wished her a good day, though my lips formed the words automatically, untouched by the sincerity they would otherwise have held. I watched her leave my car, and as soon as she was out of sight, the dam broke. Tears cascaded freely down my cheeks, a torrent of pent-up grief and anger. My child's names, the last vestiges of tangible memory I clung to, were to be commandeered and reassigned without a second thought. Throughout the drive home, I grappled with emotions that swung erratically between depths of sorrow and peaks of irritation. In that solitude, the names Scarlet and Elijah took on a new, shimmering quality in my mind, symbols of a struggle overshadowed by callousness, of joy extinguished too soon. They embodied not just identity, but an unbroken bond, tradable to none. Back at home, reflected in the quiet, familiar walls, I sobbed. I felt denied, disrespected, and yearning for acknowledgement of the loss that had been such a definitive part of my journey. The prospect of attending the baby shower dwindled in my mind. How could I possibly stand there, watching the celebration of a joy that was denied to me, knowing that the names I cherished belonged, in their opinion, to anyone at all? This moment, this drastic, brutal reawakening of hurt, demanded reckoning unlike any before. It was a storm I realized I could either weather with resilience or allow to swallow me whole, as was previously commonplace. The decision lay somewhere beneath the tears. With each tear that fell, the heaviness in my chest seemed to grow. I felt as if a dam had broken, flooding emotions that I had managed to keep at bay for far too long. The grief over my loss, which I had tried to bury and never revisit, came rushing back with an intensity that was almost suffocating. I had to pull over to the side of the road at one point, resting my head on the steering wheel and breathing deeply in an attempt to regain some sense of control over my trembling hands. I couldn't wrap my head around the casual cruelty of it all. It was as if my pain and my memories were of no consequence, simply put aside in favor of convenience or wimpy. How could something so personal, so heartbreakingly significant to me, be viewed as something transferable, up for grabs? The reality of their decisions struck me, continuously rippling through my consciousness with a mix of disbelief and anguish. As I finally arrived home, a different kind of exhaustion settled in, one that was beyond the fatigue of a long day. It was the kind of tiredness that seeped into your bones, a weariness of the heart. Everywhere I looked, the memories of what could have been haunted me, the empty spaces seeming to resonate with the echoes of Scarlet and Elijah. Sitting down at the kitchen table, I found myself questioning everything. Was I truly being unreasonable? Was I making too much of these names, allowing my hurt to morph into something selfish? These doubts gnawed at me as surely as the sadness did. The baby shower loomed ahead like a specter, casting a long shadow over my thoughts. In the quietude of my home, among the silence that was both comforting and overwhelming, I realized that this was more than just about names. It was about respect, about being seen and acknowledged in my grief. Despite the turmoil, I clung to one hope, that by understanding my own feelings, I might eventually find clarity on what to do next. Going to the baby shower seemed unthinkable, yet the idea of avoiding it came with its own thorny guilt. Deep within, I wished for some form of resolution, one that could mend what seemed irrevocably fractured without entirely tearing me apart again. Yet, the pressing thought of whether skipping the baby shower would make me the villain in this story continued to swirl in my mind. I questioned if my decision was petty or if it was justified by the repeated undercurrents of insensitivity that I had endured from both my mother and sister. It seemed as though every emotion I felt was laced with uncertainty, each one vying for prominence, clouding my judgment further. I wondered, how does one balance the need for self-preservation while not wanting to sour already fragile family ties? What would the rest of the family think of my absence? Would they understand my perspective, or would they see me as selfish and bitter? Perhaps most troubling of all was the fear of what my actions might mean for future interactions with my sister and the shadow it could cast over any attempt at reconciliation. Was this moment going to define our relationship, or could we somehow emerge from this with shared understanding? As I wrestled with these thoughts, my heart ached, both for the sibling bond I had always hoped for and the comfort of knowing my feelings were heard. My mind wandered back to when things were simpler, and a sense of loss enveloped me once more. In search of answers, I restlessly picked up my phone, contemplating calling someone who could offer advice free from bias. Perhaps a friend who knew me well, or a counselor who could give an outside perspective. Somewhere in this chaos, there had to be a pathway to peace, one where I could honor my past while cautiously looking toward the future. The dilemma felt dizzying, but I knew clarity would find me eventually, one careful step and decision at a time.